Welcome to lesson 16. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the appeals of argument. So we have 7 objectives for this lesson. The first objective is to understand Aristotle's 3 appeals of argument. The second objective is to be able to identify each appeal in written texts. Fourth, we're going to review a sample essay and discuss the appeals in that sample essay. After this lesson, I want you to read Hacker A3. So it's a nice section that talks about evaluating arguments, and it adds to sort of what I'm talking about here. It actually adds quite a few different things, so definitely make sure you read that. Also, after this lesson, I want you to read 2 short articles on steroid use in sports. One article is by Martin, and it's called Destroyed, and the other article is by Villagomez, and it's called The Designer Player. So both of these articles are handouts. So far, almost everything's been in the text, but we are going to do a lot of stuff that's handouts, especially when we get into research. So you can find those handouts on MyCC under the handouts column. So go on to MyCC, look under handouts on the same page that you see the video lessons, and you'll see Martin, Destroyed, and Villagomez, the Designer Player under there. So open those ones up and read them. After you read them, I want you to complete Journal 4. So for Journal 4, I'm going to have you summarize each article and evaluate the appeals of each article based on what you learn in this lesson and what you read in Hacker. So then I want you to email me this journal as an attachment and wait for my feedback. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible, hopefully within a day. Once you get my feedback on that journal, if you get a 3 or 4, move on to lesson 17. So let's get into it. So in the last lesson, we talked about critical thinking and the steps for effective critical thinking. Remember, we said a good critical thinker always needs to summarize, analyze, infer, synthesize, and then finally evaluate. So hopefully that helped you to understand how to think critically and how to look below the surface of something. So as I mentioned in that lesson, critical thinking is the single most valuable intellectual skill, and it's useful basically in every single industry. All employers are going to value critical thinking. It's really the whole point of college. Critical thinking is super, super important. However, critical thinking is especially important for researchers when they're evaluating arguments. So all researchers, when they're doing research, need to evaluate the sources that they're getting. So you need to be a strong critical thinker when you're looking at other people's sources to say whether or not those are good quality sources and things you can use. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson, is how to evaluate arguments effectively. So in Unit 1, I talked about the purpose of an argument is to convince somebody of something. So when you're evaluating an argument, somebody else's argument, you're thinking critically about it. You're looking closely at it and coming to a conclusion about whether or not it's a strong argument. As a general rule, arguments written by unbiased experts with lots of reliable evidence are the strongest. Arguments written by people who are biased or have a lot at stake and don't use a lot of evidence are really not that strong. So those are the kinds of things you want to look at. And you can determine whether an argument is strong or biased by using Aristotle's 3 appeals of arguments. So the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle, who is basically the best philosopher that ever lived, who was alive around 400 BC, that's right, 2,500 years ago, said arguments convince people by using 3 appeals, and we still look at these appeals today. Here he is, the man himself. Arguments convince people to believe in them logically, right? Or what he called logos, by having a clear thesis, enough support, and strong evidence. So these are sort of logical basis for convince somebody to believe something. Nice thesis, good support, strong evidence, all the things that we talked about with Essay 1. Arguments also can convince people emotionally, though, or what he called pathos. So an argument can stir our emotions and make us angry or sad, especially, and we see this a lot in debates when candidates get sort of heated, and that emotion kind of rubs off on us, and it can definitely make us angry or impassioned or sad. So whenever an author is stirring our emotions, they're appealing to us emotionally, and it really doesn't have anything to do with logic. Finally, and probably most convincingly, an argument appeals to us ethically, or has what Aristotle calls ethos, which is credibility, essentially. So if an author can prove to us that he or she is extremely credible, we're pretty much likely to believe whatever he or she has to say. So a good argument tries to find a balance between the three appeals. You want to use all three, right? An argument that's just logic might seem stale and devoid of emotion. But you also need to make sure that you're coming across as credible. So you want to sort of find all three and have a balance, and that's where you get a good, strong argument. So let's take a closer look at each of these three appeals. So the first appeal is logic, or what Aristotle called logos. When we examine logic, we wonder how effectively an argument appeals to our mind or rationality. We're like Dr. Spock. We don't have emotions. It's only logical. That's all we're interested in. When examining an argument's logos, we ask, what's the author's thesis? What's he or she trying to prove to us? Is there enough support to prove that thesis? Right? Does the author give us enough reasons, like we talked about with Essay 1? And is the support backed with strong evidence? Does the author convince us of those reasons by using statistics, facts, strong evidence? So logic is probably the most important appeal of written arguments. That's what people are primarily going to be focusing on, and that's what you should primarily look at is, is there a strong thesis? Is there enough reasons? Is there enough support? The second appeal is the emotional appeal, pathos. So an emotional appeal is really anything but logical, like I mentioned before. It's all about stirring feelings or stirring emotions. When we look for an emotional appeal, we ask, how does the argument affect my emotions? Does the author use any strategies to make me feel angry, sad, shocked, disgusted, or joyful? Right? Is the author trying to make us feel one of these ways, or does something that the author do make us feel one of these ways? Although an emotional appeal has little to do with the mind and everything to do with the heart, it can still be very convincing. Right? People are emotional beings, right? And when somebody has a very strong, impassioned tone, that sort of rubs off on us. When somebody tells us a really somber, sad story, that makes us sad. So the emotional appeal can be very convincing as well, as we'll see in just a little bit. So the last appeal is perhaps the most subtle, but also one of the most convincing. That's the ethical appeal, or what Aristotle called ethos, or having ethos. So an argument convinces us ethically, or we see the author as having ethos, when we see him or her as trustworthy, ethical, and credible. So to evaluate an ethical appeal, we ask, do I see the author as trustworthy or believable? Is the author some kind of an expert in the thing that he or she is writing about? Or is the author somehow qualified to make the argument that he or she is making? Does the author seem unbiased? Right? Is he or she relatively impartial, like a judge? Or does he or she have a very strong stake in the argument and seem biased? These right here are your Supreme Court justices, perhaps the most impartial, or hopefully the most impartial people in the country. And when Ruth Bader Ginsburg says something, you can pretty much believe it because she has a lot of ethos, a lot of credibility. She's been on the Supreme Court for a long time. When she talks, people listen. She doesn't necessarily need logic or evidence to prove her points, although she often uses that. Just by saying something, she carries a certain weight or a certain ethos. All of the justices do. So arguments appeal to us ethically when they make us believe in the author, or when an author does things that make us see him or her as trustworthy, builds up our trust. So there are the three appeals of argument. Let's practice looking at some, and a good place to practice looking is to look at some arguments that we see every day in advertisements. Really good places to recognize these appeals. So let's look at a few ads. Here's one for Abercrombie & Fitch, And this is making an argument. All advertisements are making an argument. So the goal of this argument is to get us to buy Abercrombie & Fitch clothes. So we'd ask, how is this ad trying to make us buy Abercrombie & Fitch clothes, or convincing us to buy Abercrombie & Fitch clothes? Is it convincing us logically? I don't think so. It's not really telling us that Abercrombie & Fitch are a good brand of clothes, that they hold up, that they're high quality. This guy's not even wearing clothes. So it looks like the logical appeal is out here. Is it convincing us ethically, or does this give ethos? Depends on how you see this man. If you admire this man in some way, maybe that does lend ethos to Abercrombie & Fitch. If you see that person as being similar to you, that might help you to want to buy Abercrombie & Fitch clothes. So it could have ethos for the right viewer. But the way this is really convincing us to buy Abercrombie & Fitch clothes is emotionally. When we look at this ad, we have an emotional reaction, right? He's an attractive man. He's not wearing a shirt. There's also a flag in the background, which is patriotic. So that kind of maybe stirs our feelings as an American. It makes us feel like we want to be on this yacht with this guy, and it makes us happy, right? So emotional appeal is primarily what they're using. And that's what most advertisements rely on. You hear that phrase, sex sells. That's talking about emotional appeals in advertisement. So let's move on to another one. Trigger warning. This one is kind of gross, but it's sort of the point. Yeah, that's pretty gross. The advertisement's telling us smoking can cause a slow and painful death, and there's this man who's obviously has some kind of a tumor on his neck that's you don't even want to look at. So without thinking too much about this, we obviously know that this is an emotional appeal. Right? It's clearly making us sort of disgusted and stirring our emotions and making us not want to smoke cigarettes. And it's pretty convincing too. It also has a bit of a logical appeal because this is a logical approach. It's saying smoking can cause a slow, painful death. There's a logical reason not to smoke. So we have the emotion and the logical here. Ethos isn't so much in here because we don't really know who's telling us this. We don't know where it's coming from. If we knew where it was coming from, maybe this ad would have some ethos to it. So that's primarily the emotional appeal. Let's take a look at a couple others. Here's one for a Subaru, right? The Subaru Outback Motor Trend's 2010 Sport Utility of the Year. So right here, we're actually getting a statement that this car has won an award. It's a high quality car according to Motor Trend. So that right there is the logical appeal. It's giving us a logical reason to buy the Subaru. This company has concluded that it's a good car. So there's logic. So if we're making a decision based on logic, then we would say, yes, this is a good car. I want to buy it. There's also the ethical appeal, right? Because Subaru, because it cites Motor Trend, and Motor Trend is a prestigious car magazine. So they're using Motor Trend's ethos or credibility to make us want to buy the Subaru as well. Plus, there's sort of an emotional appeal. So there's ethos, plus there's the emotional appeal. It's not quite as striking as the guy with the tumor on his neck, but if we like the outdoors and we like the mountains, maybe we want to be here. There's a pretty vista. So that might appeal to the right kind of outdoorsy sort of person who has an emotional reaction to this place and can imagine themselves there and want to be there. And those are primarily the types of people who buy Subarus, are more outdoorsy sort of people. So this one kind of has all three. So it's working pretty well. It might be really convincing for the right kind of person. So this is also kind of ethos too. If you do like the outdoors, then that lends the credibility to Subaru and makes you want to buy it. So, and actually a lot of Subaru's reputation is built on their sort of outdoorsy image, and they appeal with ethos to people who like the outdoors. So here's another one. Here's another smoking one. It's not quite as gross as the last one. It does have an emotional appeal with the black lung here, in the cigarette. Maybe that kind of is a little disgusting. But primarily this is logical appeal, right? It's telling us for every one cigarette you smoke, you lose 7 minutes off your life. Smoking can put you at risk of cancer of the throat, which we just saw, mouth, heart, lungs, lips, bladder, and in women, the cervix. Smoking increases your chances of getting a disease known as emphysema. None of the above are reversible. It is no joke. Smoking kills. So here we have several logical reasons. So this is kind of like a list of this is why you don't want to smoke. This is a very logical ad. And it's a pretty strong argument. This is the kind of thing you'd see more in a written argument. It's not quite as effective for an advertisement as maybe the guy with the neck, because advertisements are a lot more immediate. A lot of people don't spend time sort of reading advertisements, so the logical appeal often gets lost in advertisements. But there's that one. Let's take a look at just a few more. So here's one from Coca-Cola. We got a little cute little sea turtle on here, and it's telling us 71% of the Earth's surface is ocean. Shouldn't 100% of it be clean? And there's that, again, that sea turtle, and this is actually really hard to read, but it talks about how Coca-Cola is donating some money to sea turtles to help save them. How does this make us want to buy Coca-Cola? Is it telling us logically that Coca-Cola is a good product, that it tastes good? It's not like the taste test. People prefer Coca-Cola over Pepsi, or however it was in the 80s they did that test. That would be a logical appeal. Here we don't have that. Is it emotional? Perhaps, maybe we care about sea turtles, that kind of evokes our sense of emotion. It's pulling on our sense of wanting to save the world and save the environment. So that could be emotional. But primarily what it's doing here is building ethos, right? So maybe we don't see Coca-Cola as that good of a company because they make sugary drinks that give people cavities. So Coca-Cola has an image issue, and they're kind of working on it with this ad. When they say they're going to donate money to sea turtles to save the sea turtles, we see them as credible and trustworthy. We say, oh, Coca-Cola is doing good things. That actually makes me want to buy a Coca-Cola product. So ethos is very powerful, right? And if a company can build up its ethos, you're likely to believe or buy anything they sell, which brings me to the last ad. This one is for Apple, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, and they have super strong ethos. People love Apple products. They trust in Apple completely, and whenever a new Apple product comes out, they want to buy it right away just because it's made by Apple. Now that is ethos. And how do you build that? Well, they did a lot of campaigning with it, and this was part of the campaign to help build their ethos, was by selling their image, right? Here we have this kind of dorky guy in the suit saying, I'm a PC, and here we have this cool-looking guy who's saying, I'm a Mac. Nothing logical in here about the speed of the computer, the processing power of the computer, the battery life, or anything like that. That would be logical appeal. We don't have anything like that. We don't even have pictures of computers in here or anything. It's a little bit of an emotional appeal, maybe because we don't want to be like this guy, and we do want to be like this guy, because he seems a lot more down to earth, a lot cooler. He probably has a cooler life. So that's ethos, So once they're sort of saying Apple is cool, PC is not cool. If they can convince us that Apple's cool, and then we buy into the Apple line, the Apple product, they've built their ethos. We buy into them completely, and we want to be cool. We don't want to be like the PC guy. So there's a good example of super strong ethos, and this ad is really all about ethos. So there's some good examples of appeals and advertisements. So I think it's a nice way to sort of get a base for how do we look at the three appeals of argument. And hopefully that kind of gives you the idea. But that's just sort of a warm-up. Primarily what we're going to be looking at is written arguments. So you want to be able to evaluate the appeals in written arguments as well. And in advertisements, like I mentioned, the emotional appeal is really important, but in written arguments, the logical appeal is primary, right? You really want to be on the lookout for the logical appeal. So when you evaluate an argument, you want to start with the logical appeal. So you ask, what's the thesis of this argument? And then you might ask, does the author prove his or her thesis? What are his or her reasons? What reasons is the author giving us to believe the thesis? And is there enough evidence to support that thesis or not? So it can also be helpful to look at the emotional appeals and ask, does the author make me feel sad or angry or laugh in any ways? And does the rousing of emotions make the argument stronger, right? Or is it kind of like a cheap rousing of emotions that doesn't really help that much? Finally, you want to consider the author's overall ethos. So the ethos is based on the author's background. So is the author an expert? Does he or she seem neutral, or does he or she seem biased? And do I trust him or her overall, which has to do with the background and the neutrality, but also with the logical argument. You know, does the author use a lot of does the author have a lot of evidence? Does he or she look at counter arguments on the other side? All those things play into ethos. So let's take a quick look at a sample essay. So here's an example of a short essay. So we're going to read through the essay together, and as we read through the essay, I want you to consider how does this author use these various appeals. So the author is Chelsea Durbin, and it says it's a student essay, which right away might kind of put her ethos a little bit into question. The title of the article is Fast Food is Fat Food. So we have another article on fast food, but this is actually the very, very last one, I promise. Then we're going to be on to a new theme when we talk about steroids and sports. So it gives us a little bit of what to consider before we read. Down here it gives us a little bio of the author. So we probably would want to read that as part of previewing the text. We would say the author is Chelsea Durbin. We already know that she's a student. She's a junior at University of Kansas, where she will graduate with a degree in English, and later hopes to pursue a career in writing for a magazine, a weekly column, opinion column for the Daily Kansan. She explores a wide array of topics in her writing, including politics, music, religion, current issues, and campus life. When speaking to other student writers, Durbin advises them, follow your heart, always write what you believe, and be proud of your writing. So she sounds like, she's on the path to being successful, but she's not really an expert, right, in fast food. She's not a nutritionist like David Zinchenko. She's not a famous essay writer like Radley Balko. So she kind of lacks that ethos off the bat. So you want to sort of read with that in mind. Now let's take a look. We'll just read straight through. It's a Thursday night and hunger is calling. Like an earthquake, your stomach ruptures with the need for food. At first, you think about making something from your kitchen. Ramen noodles, PB&J, or leftover spaghetti from a week ago. But none of these options sounds appealing, so you do what a majority of college students do. You go for fast food. Fast food is everywhere. It is available on the main corners of a busy street, in the luxury of your own home. Fast food has become as American as baseball, and its effects are quickly catching up with us. The nation has become a culture of fast food eating and on-the-go living, ultimately creating fat America. However, fast food has some advantages in the short term. People appreciate the fact that it's fast and convenient. Here are some advantages. There's also no other food that you can pick up and have ready at a moment's notice. It involves no cooking or dishwashing. All you have to do is eat and throw away the trash. In the end, you're saving an immense amount of time. So here are some of the benefits. Nevertheless, and here's clearly a transition, there seems to be a direct link in America between obesity and fast food. Here she says, direct link in America between obesity and fast food. A typical meal from a fast food restaurant, say a serving of fries and a cheeseburger, adds up to over 1,000 calories per serving. This is about half the recommended daily allowance for an individual per day. In 2006, obesity levels of the average American had risen to 25% since 2004. About 1/3 of all Americans over the age of 20 are considered obese. The risks involved with obesity have become a major health concern throughout our nation. Premature death from heart disease. So here are some of the risks. Premature death from heart disease, stroke, diabetes, fatty liver disease, or cancer can result from obesity. Awareness of the effects of fast food is the first step if we want to conquer America's growing obesity problem. Being a college student, I know how easy it is to grab something on the go that will satisfy my hunger. I've fallen victim countless times to the convenience of fast food, because life doesn't always permit me enough time to cook a meal. Recently, however, fast food franchises have begun to add new items to value meals and improved side items to encourage healthy eating habits. Salads, grilled chicken, fruit cups, yogurt, and milk have all been added to the menus as options for alternative eating. Consciously choosing healthier options at fast food restaurants benefits your health in the long run, but just because these options exist does not make fast food a healthy diet. Loading on additional sides or adding lots of dressing to that salad only makes the calorie count go back up. Understanding the decisions that we make now will ultimately affect our future. Is something that we must be aware of. If time is on your side, go home and make yourself dinner. If it's not, choose wisely when dining out. Your body will thank you. So here we have, to briefly summarize it, we have an argument here on the dangers of fast food. So I would say her thesis is basically she's saying we should not eat fast food. And that's kind of what she's saying at the end here. So I'd say her thesis is something like people should not eat fast food. Should not eat fast food is kind of her thesis in here. So we say, how does she prove that? She does sort of look at the other side, why people eat fast food, how it's fast and convenient. But the reasons she gives us for why people should not eat fast food are, I would say, they sort of start down here. First, she says fast foods have a lot of calories. And she gives us a piece of evidence here, even though she doesn't cite a source. She says fast food, fries and a cheeseburger is over 1,000 calories. And that's half our daily allowance. So that is a lot of calories for a fast food meal. So she kind of does show us and prove to us that they have a lot of calories. And then down here she says in 2006 obesity levels went up to 25%. But 1/3 of Americans are obese. And she does say here that there's a direct link in America between obesity and fast food. So then she shows us that fast food has a lot of calories, and then she says obesity's gone up. So when we're evaluating the argument, we want to look closely at that and say, is that strong evidence? Does this prove to us that we should not eat fast food? Because that's what she's trying to do. So you might say yes. However, she doesn't actually prove a direct link here. She says fast food has a direct link, and then she says obesity levels have risen. But the way she's putting it together, it seems like she's saying fast food is causing this obesity. But does fast food cause all of this obesity? Is that the reason obesity levels are rising, is because of fast food? Chelsea Durbin wants us to think so. But if we think critically about this evidence and this argument, we could say maybe it's a part, but it's certainly not the whole. She's definitely exaggerating here. Also, fast food might not cause obesity at all. Take a look at this. There's 1,000 calories in a fast food meal, and that's half the daily allowance. But couldn't you technically eat fast food every single day and then eat, a healthier breakfast and a healthier lunch and be within the dietary allowance and not gain weight? You could. So that shows that that fast food really doesn't have much to do with obesity levels at all. So you want to be careful of stuff like this. And this is why you want to think critically of your arguments. And this is actually a logical fallacy, which we're going to talk more about in the next lesson. This is post hoc reasoning. And here, she's trying to convince us that because something happened first or looked this way, this result followed. But the reality is that it's hard to prove the cause of anything. And here's one thing that I like to tell students. If you look at charts, it looks like the sales of ice cream are very correlated to murders, right? So somebody could draw the causation conclusion that murders are caused by ice cream, or that ice cream is primarily consumed by murderers, something like that, because they seem correlated. But that's the post hoc logical fallacy, because in reality, there's actually a third effect there's actually a third cause that affects both of these, and that is the heat. So when the heat goes up, ice cream sales go up, and so does murder. So you want to be really careful about things that seem to say that one thing is causing another, because it's very hard to sort of prove what causes what. So she has a big hole in her argument right here. And that's really her only evidence that she gives us for why we shouldn't eat fast food. Everything else is talking mostly about what fast food is doing. So she does actually a pretty good job of acknowledging the other side, why people eat fast food, and how fast food companies are doing more to change their menu. So I think that kind of helps her ethos, but the fact that she has this sort of logical problem really hurts it, because without that, she really doesn't have any evidence for her thesis that we shouldn't eat fast food, which kind of makes the whole essay kind of pointless. Plus, we said she's not really an expert in the first place, so her ethos is kind of, I would say, really down. Even though she does look at the other side, I wouldn't really trust Chelsea Durbin that much. So lastly, let's take a look at some of the emotional appeals. Does she have emotional appeals in here? I think she definitely does. I mean, she tells us her story, which kind of gives us this here and here, being a college student, so that kind of helps her ethos a little bit and kind of makes us feel for her a little bit. Plus, she sort of mentions in here, I think this is probably the clearest example of an emotional appeal, some of the ways that obesity affects us. Heart disease, stroke, diabetes, fatty liver disease, or cancer can result from obesity. Here it's kind of trying to scare us a little bit with the effects of obesity. Even though she hasn't really proven to us that fast food causes obesity, she's trying to scare us here. So there's a good example of an emotional appeal. So if we bring it all together, synthesize, we'd say overall, she does have an argument, but I'm not sure that her argument's very strong. Logically, her argument is really kind of weak, and that kind of hurts her ethos in here. So I'd say probably not really that strong for this one. So that's what you want to try to do, and that's what I'm asking you to try to do with these steroids articles. Let's flip back to the PowerPoint. So let's wrap up real quick here. When encountering arguments, right, it's really important to evaluate them critically. So in order to do this, you want to examine this author's appeals of argument. Does the author appeal to us logically? That's really important in writing. So what's the author's thesis? How does the author support that thesis with reasons? Does the author have enough evidence or not enough evidence? What's the emotional appeals of the argument? Does the argument stir our emotions in any ways? And is it effective, right? Is the author just trying to scare us, or is the author making a genuine emotional appeal? The ethical appeal, is the author trustworthy? Do we believe him or her? Do we see him or her as a credible author? Does he or she look at the other side much? So that's the ethical appeal. So when you're looking at all of these, it'll give you a good sense of whether an argument is strong or not. So for more on evaluating arguments, make sure you read Hacker A3. She gives a couple of other tips on there. It's not that easy to do. It's not completely easy to do, but that's what you want to try to do, is to get a sense of, is an argument strong or not strong. So I want you to do a journal right after this lesson. Read 2 short articles on steroids in sports. One's by Peter Martin, it's called Destroyed, and the other one's by Villa Gomez, and it's called The Designer Player. So both these articles are handouts and available under the handouts column on MyCC. So read those 2, and then for Journal 4, summarize each article briefly, and then try to evaluate the appeals. So think about the logical, the emotional, and the ethical for each of those. And then email them to me, and I'll give you some feedback on that one. So do that before you move on to lesson 17, and I'll see you there. All right.